Welcome back. Now, I made a little bit of a mistake. I went ahead and started recording the next part of the video and then decided to scrap all of that. And that means that there might be a couple of files that are different. I tried to kind of reset things. This is why we're supposed to use Git. Because it's kind of come back to bite me now, where I tried to reset things back to where we originally were. So, look, if anything, this will probably be a good experience, where if you notice things that are a little bit different in my code, then you can sort of catch that and make any changes that you need to on your end. But for the most part, I think it's actually going to be fine. All right, so let's pick up where we left off. One thing we need to do now is make it so that when we click on this row, or I might even just make this a button, make it so that when we click here, it takes us to that specific pros and cons list. Another thing I want to do is just make it so that this menu item takes us to the list, because currently, when we go to the default page, we have no way of actually getting to that list page unless we go to /lists. So let's look at how we'll do that. That's probably the first thing we'll cover. So let's jump into our layouts. And that's going to be in the main drawer. Notice how we got things broken up here. So rather than having that very crowded main layout, often in apps, this ends up being a really long file, your main layout file. So by default, I just break everything down. So then we can just jump straight into the main drawer by control clicking there. And now we can go ahead and start making some changes. So I've got this use main menu items. And the reason I put that into a composable is so that we can easily tap into these items here and basically hide and show items programmatically. Is that actually how we're using it? Menu item. Okay, and they get passed down here. I see. Okay, so we'll jump in here, and then we'll jump into our base menu items. And I'll do a Control-Alt-M just to show you where we are here. So we've got a use main menu items composable, and then we've got our base menu items. These are the ones that are always going to show up. And if we wanted, we could come into this composable here and programmatically hide and show different items, based on whether or not you're an admin and stuff like that. Okay, but that's not what we're going into right now. We want to show our lists here. So maybe like MDI list. Is there anything for that? MDI. Might have to restart Vola. I'm not getting any autocomplete there. MDI list box, maybe? Let's just go with that. I'm sure that's fine. And we'll call this pro con lists. And we want to say where that goes to. And from memory, let's just find that route. Yeah, here we go, list.manage. Okay, so let's give that a try. And we'll go to /. And it takes us there. There we go. Maybe we'll do a redirect as well. So if we jump into our routes file here, yeah, a quick way we can solve this problem is just going to path. And if it's a path of nothing, instead of loading that component, we can just do a redirect to list.manage. There we go. So now the home page, oops, that's meant to be the name of list.manage. Let's try that. So the home page, yeah, just redirects us directly to list.manage. So here we go. Now we got a menu item that works, even though it's not particularly useful anymore because it just, by default, we get taken straight there anyway. But now you know how to do it. Next, let's make it so that when you click on this button, it takes us to a new page. We might actually go ahead and make that page quickly. So if I go to, sorry, not pages, modules, and we go to Procon, we've got a page here for our Manage Procons page. I might have actually built this earlier, so if you haven't got that built, go ahead and build that. And we might just do the classic writing of useless text in there just to see if it's working. And now we need a route that takes us there as well. And as you remember from the previous video, this route file automatically gets picked up. And because it's main, it means that it gets automatically added. If I open up our default routes file, automatically added inside of our inside of our main layout. Right. So next, let's go ahead and make that route, and we'll give it a path equal to, I think that'll be list and then the ID of the list. So list ID. So now we've got the list ID that we can work with. We'll give it a name of manage.list. And then what else does it want here? Why am I getting red squigglies there? I don't know what else it's asking for. Route record raw, that's correct, isn't it? Goodness gracious me, we've just started and already I'm getting utterly confused. So we get a path, a name. Oh, of course it needs a component. All right, component, and then we'll give it that manage pro cons page. So manage pro cons page, get that imported. Now, notice that I'm not using a function here to import this. I don't know if I talked about this in the previous video, but you can import it like this, and that gives us code splitting. All right, but there are some situations where you might not actually want to use code splitting. And I think this is one, because when I land on this app, I'd rather have a slightly longer loading time when I first land on the app. And then have it so that when that app is loaded and I click on the link, it takes me straight there. So I don't have to wait for this link, basically for this file to be loaded in. So that's the thing with code splitting. If we have a function here that imports it like this, then it means that when we click on that link, we then have to wait for this code to be imported before it takes us to that page. Now, there are good things about this because it means when you initially load your application, it's a little bit faster because it doesn't have to load this in advance. However, we might want to load that in advance, and especially for apps where people are going to be doing a lot of tasks and they're going to keep that app open for a long time. So, this is very much kind of an app that you would probably keep open in your browser for like more than 5 or 10 minutes. So usually in that case, I want my loading to happen up front when that user first opens this application. And I'd rather than wait an extra, few milliseconds for the initial load, but then when they click on the link, it takes them directly to that page without them having to wait for all that code to load. I just feel like that's a slightly better experience. I mean, it's kind of neither here nor there at this point, but I rather have the work of downloading those files be done up front, and then they get the snappiness rather than the other way around. Now, alternatively though, if it's a landing page, the exact opposite is true. With a landing page, you want it to load as quickly as possible. So in that case, code splitting is a really good idea for landing pages. But yeah, you just kind of need to use your best judgment here. Is it worth loading this entire component up front? And if you want it loaded up front, that's how we would write this code. Or if you want it to wait until it goes to that link before this code is loaded, then you would write it like this. All right, that's the difference of, so you might have wondered, why does Quasar have it this way by default? And that's why by default, Quasar uses this method of breaking your code apart. And that's what this does. It means don't actually import this code yet. Import it when it's needed. You'll notice that's what it's like in the routes file by default. This is what happens with the layout. The layout isn't actually imported until it's needed. And it means that when this routes file is loaded, a whole bunch of these imports don't actually get imported straight away. And it means that we get a much snappier load time when we first open our app. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, do some research. This is a more advanced series, so do your own research. All right, so there we go. We're now just loading that straight away. I might jump out of full screen here and whack that on the side. And we'll go into kind of like designer mode. Now, the next thing we're going to do is check if this page is actually working. So list / blah, 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 blah. And that is not working. And this should be list singular. So show me that individual list. There we go. And that's now open that page, which is now we can see why we can see working here. Now we want to send through the props. And by that, I mean, I want to send through this parameter here as a prop. So we can say props true. And that means list ID is now being sent down to this component. So let's control click that component. I should say what I'm doing as I go here. Double click, copy, control click. Now we'll say, I think I've got a snippet for that. Paste that in there, and the list ID is now going to be equal to what we get from that route. And that's going to be a string. And now let's just display that here to make sure that that is working. And it is, so whatever we send through there is being accepted. So now we've got the list ID to work with. Now we need to link this through. So let's jump back to our list page and make it so that when we click on here, it takes us to list / and then the ID of the list that we clicked on. Now, to do this, we're actually going to break one of our rules, which is that the route should not be coupled to lower level components. So usually we don't want any knowledge of the route or any knowledge related to routing to be on components like the page. Usually, the table. Usually what we would want to do is alert the parent of any changes that then causes us to go to a different route. And that means that the component itself isn't coupled to the route. So, for example, clicking on this in one context might take us to a different page, whereas clicking on it in another context might actually open a dialog. So to keep this component flexible, ideally we would make it so that clicking on this row doesn't necessarily take us to a different route. So hopefully that makes sense. Usually we want the component and the route to be decoupled. However, there is a little bit of an edge case that we have to deal with here, and it's kind of an accessibility thing. We want to make it so that when we hover over this link, so we're going to turn this into a link that takes us to that list, we want to make it so that when we hover over it, it natively knows that it's a link. And in order to do that, we actually have to create a coupling here. So let me show you what I actually mean by that. If we go to our manage list table, we want to tap into this name cell. So to do that, I'm just going to steal some code here. We'll go body cell name, and we'll just add working in here. And there we go. Now we've tapped into that cell. And next, I'm going to say Q button. And let's say that this is going to take us to a new route, which has a name of, let's go back to that route to see what it is. Manage.list. So clicking on this button takes us to manage.list, and we'll give it a label now equal to scope.row.name. There we go. And I don't like the caps on that, so we'll go no caps here, and we'll also flatten it. Now, to the point of what I was talking about before, what I wish I could do, and I want to give you the whole context here, which is why I'm talking about what I wish I could do, is something like this. Emit, maybe like name clicked or something like that. I haven't thought through what I'd name that, but you know, something like this, name clicked, and then you would send through the scope.row, and then the parent would redirect us. And let's actually go ahead and write that code so we can see what that looks like. Let's call this just row clicked. That might be a better name for it. We'll come in here and we'll say row dash clicked, and that's going to send through the list. Is that looking right? Yep. And now we'll go to manage lists view, and we'll listen for that. At row clicked. And I want you to get used to finding these components, by the way, rather than using your menu here. You'll find that you can move a lot faster if you get used to these naming conventions and finding your components using Control P or whatever it is for your editor in order to actually go ahead and search for that component. It's a much faster way to move around. And now what I could do is something like this. Const router is equal to use router. Get that imported. And now we can say router.push. You've probably done something like this before. And then this would be, what would we call it? List.manage. And we also want to send the params there. I think it's params. Yep. And that's going to be the list ID. So list ID. And now we want to grab the list that was clicked on, list.id. Whoop, list.id. Keeps trying to do some autocomplete there. Okay, so it doesn't like something with that. Name list.manage. I think that's correct. Let's try it again. Maybe a refresh. No match for name list.manage. Thought that was right. Oh, manage.list. Gotta learn my own conventions. Manage.list. Let's try that again. Okay, so that's working. Now, when we click on this, it takes us directly to that page. So here's the problem. If I control click this, I expect that to open this in a new tab. That's what I'm used to doing. If you're a power user, you expect to be able to control click something and it takes you to that page in a new tab. So I'm going to control click this and it doesn't work. Now, the first thing you might think is, well, let's just write some code that automatically opens that in a new tab if you hold control, but that gets really messy fast. And are we really going to write code like that every single time? But there's also a deeper problem here, which is an accessibility one. Usually when you hover over this, you actually get a little menu in the bottom here that shows you the link to what you're hovering over. So let's just do it here. Notice that when I hover over this link in the bottom left here, so have a look at down here while I hover, notice that we get a little message that shows us where it's going. So we don't want to lose that. And it might not seem like a big deal at the moment, but there's all sorts of other little problems that we can run into if we do things in a quote-unquote unnative way. And so I want to make it so that this link is actually control clickable without having to write some fancy code. So let's see how we would do that. And it involves doing some coupling. As far as I know, there's actually no simple way around this. We essentially have to create knowledge of the route on this component. And the reason I'm talking this to death is because I want you to know that this is an edge case. Usually your table should have no knowledge of the router. Usually nothing should have knowledge of the route except the page. But this is an exception. Okay, so let's get rid of that. And let's come up here, get rid of that. Come down here and get rid of this. And instead, we're going to use the :2 method, which I've actually already got written here. So now we'll say params is equal to, we'll say list ID for that is the scope.row.id. Okay? Now when I hover over this, notice in the bottom left that we've actually got that ID showing up. Click on there and it still works. But if I control click it, it now opens it in a new tab. So if you're a power user, you got a bunch of lists that you want to work on, you can control click, 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 click down the page and have them all open at once. So there we go. Now that we've got that working and I've explained that to death, let's move on to the next thing, which is actually building this pro cons page. Whew. So in order to do that, let's jump into our manage pro cons page. Here we go. And the next thing we'll do is get that view injected in here. So let's go manage pro con view. I think that's what we called it. Manage view, manage pro cons view. Okay, I just had to do a little control space thing there. Yeah, sometimes this happens with Valorant. I'm not sure whether tag naming changes to camel case all of a sudden. Anyway, that's fixed. Now we want to remain in control. So before we do too much developing, we're going to pass this ID down. List ID is equal to that list ID. And I'm going to copy this, control click into that component, paste it there. And there we go. We've got that list ID showing up. So it's working. Next, we want to actually grab that list and all of its pro cons as well. So in order to do that, by the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's this new thing in VS Code where you can see the current folder that you're on. At first I thought it was like a CSS bug or something, but it's actually really cool when you learn what it's actually doing. So now I can see the entire path of where I'm at. See? Kind of shows you your path up the chain there. So I thought that was kind of a neat feature. They also added it into my editor, and I hated it in the files because I tend to keep really small files. It was just a nuisance. So in order to get rid of that, I right-clicked on where that was showing and then, I don't know, disabled something. So you can right-click here, I think, and yeah, I don't know how to do it. But anyway, that's kind of cool. Something interesting. So on this view, I now want to get that list from the backend. So let's come in here and say const list finder is equal to use list finder. Notice we're using the singular list because we're only getting one list. Control-Alt-M to open that within its directory. And now let's go ahead and create this single context composable. Use list finder.ts composable, and we'll say const finder is equal to use finder, send through our list there, and then ... finder. Now we also want to get our pro cons with that. So let's say with pro cons. Now I do have a syntax here where you can say with and then send through a string pro underscore cons. But the problem with this is we lose typing. So it's impossible, or at least unfeasible, to maintain typing using string contacts like this. Using strings like that. So now I'm using an object because now I get full typing. And it means that we can also do other things like control space in here. And I'm actually able to continue our typing journey along the way here because of that functionality, because I'm able to use an object syntax here. So now later on, if you want to say, hey, give me my pro cons, but only where the importance is greater than 5, for example, I can now do that really, really easily. So that's why we're cracking it open with an object rather than using a string there. Pretty effing cool. So we got our pro cons being pulled in. Let's come back here. And why have we got a red squiggly? Oh, because it's not imported. Control space, get that imported. And actually, let me control click into that and put an immediate on this as well. Just means that I don't have to call finder.find straight away. Immediate just means that this is going to immediately call finder.find. Okay? Back here. And now we want to remain in control. So before we do anything, we want to make sure that we're actually getting that data back. So list finder dot record dot value. Save that. Whoops, put an S in the end there. Okay, we're actually getting nothing back there. So what's going on here? Trying to find a record without an ID. Oh, it needs knowledge of the ID as well. Oh, this is a really good opportunity for me to show you another thing that we've solidified in the Blue Standard. So when you're using single context composables, the first thing you send through to that composable is either the props or the options. So let's just say we've got a lot of things that we need to send through to this composable. So for example, something A, the tempting thing to do is go something A, something B, something C, something D, and it gets really, really overwhelming. And so we have a rule that looks like this. You're only allowed to send 2 things to a single context composable. And that is the props and the options. So in this case, and by the way, instead of calling that props, I should actually be calling that manage pro cons view props. I tend to do this just because it's a little bit easier to find and do an export there. I think the generator automatically does that, but I got rid of it when I added the props in manually. So yeah, that's usually what I try to do here because that's going to be important in a second. Yeah, and so the first parameter is allowed to be either props or our options. So in this case, it's going to be our props. And the reason I'm sending the props through in this case is because we need that list ID. Now, the tempting thing to do here that I used to do a lot in the past is something like this. Const list ID is equal to ref, and you might send through props, and then you might send through the list ID, and then you can use the list ID like that. Now, one of the cool things about single context composables is we don't need to, this composable is allowed to have all of the knowledge of the props. Okay, so it doesn't matter if it knows everything about all the props that can be passed down to it. This is a little bit hard to explain, but I'm going to do my best anyway. I used to use this method because I was worried that, hey, if I add other things onto this prop, or if I make any changes here, now this use list finder has got all of this knowledge of these props that it doesn't need, right? So basically, my reasoning of doing this method here with toRef was that I don't want to give my composable knowledge that it doesn't need. In other words, I don't want to tightly couple this composable to the props that go down to this component, all right? In general, that is actually a really good line of thinking. You want to make sure that you're not coupling things to your composables. But it's different with a single context composable. Single context composables are allowed to have the full knowledge of this view, right? And because of that, we can now send the entire props down. And think about this for a second. It might take a while for this to click, but the reason it can have all of the knowledge of the view is because we've agreed, by calling it a single context composable, we're saying this composable is only ever going to be used in this view. It's only got one context. It only ever gets used here. And because of that, therefore, it is allowed to have any knowledge it wants of this view. So usually we've got really strict rules around things like the page, what the page is allowed to have knowledge of, what the component is allowed to have knowledge of. We create all of these lines of communication, which allows us to keep our app really, really flexible. So usually we're following rules like that. However, we've kind of flipped that on its head here with these single context composables. We're basically saying, yo, the only purpose of this composable is to extract our logic, right? Which is why we move it into this folder here, is to extract our logic, and it's not so that it can be used in other parts of our application. And because of that, because it's only got that purpose, we're allowed to do things like sending it through the entire props. I hope that made sense and it didn't confuse you, but it's okay. We're going to keep revisiting these concepts throughout these series so that they really land. And later on, I'll probably do a video just talking about the difference between single context and multi-context composables. It's really, really wonderful what it does for you in the future of developing apps. Okay, so I just Control-Alt-clicked that. So now we've got it on the right here. And this is going to accept those props. So props is equal to those props there. And now what we can do is say that the ID, and remember, we use maybe ref or getter all the time in our composables. And because we use maybe ref or getter, ID can either be a raw string like this, or it could be a ref. So const my ID is equal to a ref like this. Or in this case, we actually want to use a function like this. Props dot, and notice we get completion here, list ID. And there we go. That's actually working now. How cool is that? So why are we using a function here? This is one of those things where you need to have kind of a deeper knowledge of reactivity. I'm just going to touch on it briefly. Props is a reactive here. So if I were to say props.listID, we're actually losing reactivity. So even though it looks like it works, if we were to hit this route without refreshing the page, unfortunately, it's kind of hard to demonstrate this, but we would lose reactivity. Let me just move that across a little bit. Yeah, so if we were to do a router.push that takes us to a different route, it would actually not pick up on those changes, and therefore it wouldn't show us the new list. So we want to make sure that this is reactive, and in order to do that, we actually have to have a function that returns props.listID. And the reason is, if we do it like this, we're sending through the raw value of props.listID. So this is essentially the same of sending the list ID directly like that. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. This is the same as sending through the raw value. In order to maintain reactivity, we actually have to turn it into a getter. And we do that by simply sending through a function like this. Now, it took me a few years to start writing code that looks like that. And like I might have mentioned before, or like I did mention before, is the way you often see people doing it is something like this. Const list ID is equal to ref props list ID. For me, this was too verbose, and I wanted to find a way to do this with less code. And this is what I ended up landing on. All right. Now, look, honestly, if you were to just do props.listID like that, it would probably work for the most part, but you are going to end up in situations. Yeah, you are going to end up in situations where, you know, you might have a link on this page that takes you to a different list ID. In fact, let me just quickly demonstrate that this wouldn't work. Lists. Actually, no, I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to say that for another day. I don't want to over-explain all of this. So there we go. Now we're getting all of that data in, and now you know how to, with a very small amount of code, easily pull in the list ID and then show the list for that ID. And also all the pros and cons with that list. Oh, one more thing I should mention is this pros and cons list will probably be empty for you. I was working on this earlier, so that's why it's showing all of that. I might just come into application, clear the site data, come back here and just make a new list again. Lists, there we go. Create one, my list. Pretty cool little app we've built here. Create that. Let's click on that. And there we go. Now that should be something more like what you're seeing. Moving on. Next up, we're going to build this table out, and it's got description, and then it's got importance out of 10. So maybe we can just get that up and going. Actually, first, we probably want to make it so that we can create pros and cons, because the table's not going to look like much until we've got some pros and cons to work with. Yeah, so let's do that first. And we're going to have these two buttons, create con and create pro. And I'm actually going to turn that into its own component, I think. Let's see what it would look like without its own component first. Queue, page, sticky, button. We want it to be a fab button. Label is equal to, let's just go create pro. And we've got to create con table button. And we'll set the color of this one equal to green. Maybe like a green 7. And let's make this one a red 7. Maybe switch them around. I don't know, green first or red first? Let's go green first. I'm going to put this in a div, I think, and let's say a gutter of medium, something like that. Yep, let's go small. And next, I'm going to give this an offset. And I might go maybe like 14 for the offset. Bit more, 18. Cool. So we can create a pro, we can create a con. Next, we want to make it so that we show a dialog when we click on one of those. I might actually extract this to its own component though. So we'll go new file. And we'll call this pro con sticky. Now notice that I'm building this inside of the view. So just like how you've got single context composables, we've also got single context components. So this component, it's unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely that I would use it anywhere else in my app. And for that reason, I'm totally happy to put it inside of this folder next to the view. So this is something that you can do if you're working on a component that probably would never move around your application. And it's okay if you get it wrong every now and then. Sometimes you will actually need to reuse a component, and it's okay if you got this wrong a couple of times. It's very easy to refactor later on. So let's do that. Template. I'm going to grab that. And we want to actually call this the name of the component under the hood. So it's a page sticky. So instead of just sticky, we'll call it a page sticky. And that's getting close. Then we'll say const emit is equal to define emits. And by the way, there's a new syntax for define emits, but it has been giving me some warnings in the console, so I haven't been using it yet. But just know that there is a different syntax that we'll be using for emit soon, but this one works fine for now. So void, I'm going to make 2 of these. And one's for creating a pro, one's for creating a con. So we have the name of the event, which is create-pro, and then create con. And that's pretty much it. Then when you click on this one, emit, create pro, and create con. Now, that's all we had to do to extract that component. It really wasn't that much extra effort. And now we can clean this up big time. So it's totally worth doing patterns like this, especially once you get really, really good at understanding the difference between props and events. And you get kind of really fluent with using props and events. It becomes quite simple to do these extractions of code. So let's add that in there. So now it still shows up. And let's make it so that something actually happens when we click on those buttons. Actually, we'll probably need the dialog first. Yeah, first we're going to have to create the dialog so that it shows and hides. Yeah, okay. So I'll come in here and say create pro con dialog. We already have that because we built it earlier. And I'm going to control click into this. This will be a create dialog. We're pulling this out of augment Quasar. So let's import that from at augment. Oh no, we're using the one that's not namespaced. Yeah, I've since namespaced this, so in the future it'll be at augment Quasar / core. But for now it's augment Quasar. And let's just do the classic checking that it's working. And then we'll come in here and create a composable for showing that dialog. We'll say const create pro con pro con creator is equal to use pro con creator, and then we'll go ahead and create that. New file .ts composable const creator is equal to use creator, and this is for a procon. All right. Let's spread that in there. Now if I control space next to this, I should get the import, and there it is. And I'm going to add on there the showing of the dialog. Const show dialog is a ref that's false by default. We'll expose that here. And now we can come down and say vModel is equal to procon creator dot show dialog dot value. Let's see if that works. Okay, we also need to make it so that clicking on this button actually does that. So we'll say at, what do we say? At create con. And we'll also want to edit the form here, won't we? Yeah, okay, so let's just crack that open. And we'll say procon creator.form.value. So our creator composable, if I just control click into here, when we use creator, we actually get a form on this for free. I've shown you this before, actually. So form.value. And now we've got isPro, that Boolean that we created for this. So now I'm going to come back and we'll say dot is pro is equal to false. So if we're creating a con, is pro equals false. And then if we're creating a pro, is pro equals true. So we're just going to set that up front on the form, and then we'll show you the dialog. So we can say pro con creator dot show dialog dot value is equal to true. And there we go. And it's working. Cool. Now let's do that chain for the form. And we'll do this by going Control Alt click. And then this is going to be the form. So we'll call this pro con form. Yep, there it is. We'll get that imported. And Control Alt click that. So we got all three of these side by side. Now we can say const model value is equal to define model. I'm just going to type this from scratch so we get used to typing it. And the thing that is inside of this, by the way, this is what I do a lot when I've got three things side by side. So often you'll have this where you want to do lots of splits and you run out of space. You can just grab one of the sections and just throw it to the side like that. So that's what I do. I just kind of throw it to the side as much as I can, depending on what I'm focusing on. Yeah. Okay, so we'll call this a pro, this is a form for pro con. So form, that's for a pro con. But by the way, as I'm building all of this, I do want you to realize that a lot of what we're doing here is just creating a solid foundation for adding code into the future. So you get used to these patterns, then you can build them really quickly. But it's more than that. It's also knowing that in the future, we've got all of these little areas that we can tap into. So it's very easy for future developers and for yourself to then expand on some of these concepts. So for example, maybe you want to build a custom form because having a form that reads down the page isn't what you're looking for. You want something that's got, you know, different columns and different widths for the inputs and stuff like that. In that case, we can now jump into the form component and do it custom there. Or maybe you want to have two form components, one that's kind of more laid out and one that's not. We just kind of have this flexibility now to be able to just create more combinations in our code. And one of the important things about this is you always want to be able to say yes to a client. So when a client says, oh, can we do it this way? Or can we do it that way? I've always thought that if my answer is no to that question, then I haven't done my job properly. I should never say to a client, oh, we're not set up for that. There are some exceptions to this where the client totally throws something left of field and they basically pivot the entire application. And then you kind of have to say, well, you want to build something completely different now to what I originally started with. But look, to be honest, that's only ever really happened to me once. And usually with clients, I find that if I ever have that gut feeling where I want to say to them, we're not set up for that, or we can't really do that because of the way we've coded it, that's my fault. And this is my answer to that over the years. I got really, every single time I would say something like that, I would then think, well, how do we orchestrate our code? How do we architect our code so that I never have to say no to clients, or at least I say no to clients more rarely? And this is one of the reasons we've ended up with this architecture. Okay, bit of an aside there. We'll make this a Q import and give it a label equal to maybe description and v model. What do we have on this form? Model value dot, whoops, make sure I grab that. One of the things I love about linters is I can just write across the page, and then when you save it, it goes to a new line. So now save, and it just kind of lints it beautifully for you. I love that. Model value dot description. What have I done wrong here? Oh, that needs to be required. So required is equal to true. And I'm going to set model value as the first parameter there. I don't think that's actually necessary. But I do it anyway, just because of, I'd rather just stick to the same pattern. Actually, now that I think about it, I wonder if you can do that inside the object. And then we could lay our code out like this, which I think would be nicer. Oh, maybe you can't. Anyway, I'll look into that another time. Or maybe you could... Yeah, you wouldn't want to multi-line that now because that just feels like overkill. Yeah. All right, that'll do for now. Okay, so model value is required. So yeah, I want to point out quickly, if required is equal to false, which I'm pretty sure is the default there, we get an error here because model value might not actually, that might be undefined. And so when you're V-modeling things, you need to know that that thing you're V-modeling is going to exist, which is why you often need to ensure that true set there, and that gets rid of that type error. Okay, so that might do. Filled. See what we got now. The other thing is I'll put this in a cue card section. And let me come back in here, copy that, and then just paste it in there. But this time we call it form. Import you. Import you. I'm thinking about having auto imports for stuff that comes out of ViewModel core. But that would have to be later on when the API is very, very much solidified so that we don't accidentally end up with clashes. For example, maybe instead of form, that should be like view model form. I don't know. Just in case you want to use form for something else. Okay, so now we'll v-model our form there. This is all the stuff I showed in the previous video. We're not getting that dialog anymore. Oh, it needs to be modeled here as well. V-model for the form is going to be proconCreator.form.value. Try another refresh. There we go. And now I want the description here to be either create pro or create con. And I think in this case, I'm going to do that directly on the dialog. So we'll say the title is equal to, and maybe we'll put this in a computed up here so it doesn't end up being too lengthy. And let's call this toolbar title. That seems appropriate. Double click, copy, const toolbar title is equal to computed. I'm going to put a new line in there. And then we'll return form.value.isPro. So if it's a pro, we'll say create pro. Otherwise, we're going to say create con. Create con. Create pro. Create con. There we go. Maybe we can change the color based on that as well. So how about const? We'll just call this color. And we'll return. I might even just steal that whole line of code. So if it's a pro, we'll make the color green. Otherwise, we'll make the color red. And I like to go slightly darker. So let's go green 7. Yeah, now we'll use that color. I might even send it down to the form as well. Just kind of playing around here. What happens if I set that color equal to the color? I wonder if I built this so that it's got a color prop. Yeah, I did. Looks great. There we go. So let's just get that on the inside as well. Control-Alt-click that. And we're just going to accept color as a prop. Boom, boom. And I could do the whole... Yeah, we'll do it this way, actually. Interface, props. Let's keep things consistent. Color is equal to... And I'm just going to get the name of this to make sure I'm doing it properly. Procon form props is equal to a string. And I think there's actually one... Yeah, Quasar's got this now where you can say named color. Yeah, there we go. So we get typing for the color as well. This is something that was added... I think it was kind of recently. Really... By the way, if you want to learn a bit of cool TypeScript, control-click into that and take a look at what's happening here. There's some pretty interesting TypeScript stuff going on. Stuff I didn't know about. Like, I didn't know you could use a template string within TypeScript. It's like TypeScript has some basic understanding of template strings, which is kind of wicked. Yeah, so that's cool. So next we'll say define props. This will give an opportunity to teach some other stuff as well. So now that color should get passed through. So I'll say color is equal to the color. And now when you click on the field, whoop, okay, that's not working. Yeah, we want to send it down here. Oh, I am sending it down. Procon form sends down the color, gets picked up here. Maybe we just need to refresh the page. Yeah, there we go. So then that color gets passed down to the form as well. All right, I'm going to put an autofocus on this. Autofocus. There we go. So now I can start typing straight away. Do be aware that if you do this, then everywhere that you use the form, autofocus is going to be set to true now. So if I had this form somewhere that wasn't in a dialog and it was on a page where I don't want it to autofocus, this would be problematic. So in that case, yeah, this is going to be a cool opportunity to teach some cool stuff. So we'll say with defaults here. So we can wrap this inside of with defaults. Okay, this is a macro that we get. Now, the second parameter here is going to be an object for that macro. I know this is a little bit ugly to look at. I'll just write it again so you can see. I usually just click at the start and go with defaults and then put all of this inside of that. And then the second parameter is an object. Now we're going to say autofocus. Let's accept autofocus as a parameter, which is a Boolean, and I'm going to make it optional. And by default, we might actually set that equal to false. And by doing with defaults here, I can now say, if I control space, autofocus is set to false by default. So now, if I click on here, it doesn't autofocus by default. Okay, because it's probably not a good idea to have that as a default setting. This is something you would want to opt into. Otherwise, you're creating problems in the future. Whereas really, you want things to be simple by default, but then you opt into complexity. So now, this component, the dialog, is going to opt in to that complexity by saying autofocus. There we go. Now it autofocuses, and we can start typing straight away. So do you see what I mean by that? Where this is what Quasar does. You notice that in QTable, for example, you've got a whole bunch of complexity, especially QSelect even, where there's a million different things you can do. But by default, those components are ridiculously simple. You can create an entire table by literally just sending through the row. You don't even need to send the columns for a table component to work. So this is what we're doing here. We're following that mentality. Don't autofocus by default. Keep it really simple. It's just a basic form. And then opt in to complexity. All right. So let the user, all right. And I know that in this case, the user is ourselves. So that might be a bit confusing. But from this perspective on the form component, I'm thinking to myself, I want the user of this component to have to do as little as possible to get it working nicely. And this is where with defaults is really, really handy because you can start adding in properties and then defaulting them to things that just make the most sense. For example, autofocus, you would not expect a form to autofocus by default. And so we set it to false by default. And then I get to be the one that opts into complexity. The person using that component then opts into the complexity. So later on down the line, when somebody uses this form in a different context, they're not going, oh, what the hell? Why is this, why is this autofocusing? What's going on here? And then they have to dig into it. And then they're like, oh, hang on, now I have to set the defaults myself, and it just becomes a little bit of an annoyance, whereas we want to keep things smooth moving forward when we code. So that's kind of my mentality behind that. So there we go. Now we can come in here, type stuff in. Let's make it so that when that closes, it clears this form. I think that would make sense. I'm going to close that, and I'll say @hide procon creator dot, I think we got a reset form on this actually. Maybe we don't. No, I think I didn't put it on there because we don't need to. We can just set form.value equal to an empty object. So blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and when we go back into it, that's now being reset. Cool. That's working. Let's make it so that we can actually create this now. So @create. So when you click on this create button, then this @create is going to be triggered. By the way, the reason that gets triggered, if I Control-Alt-click this, is because a create dialog has an @create event. So this @create event is being triggered on this component here, the augment Quasar component. That's why we've got this functionality. Okay. Dot create, and I believe we've also got creating, and that's going to be equal to procon creator dot creating dot value. I I think that's just a glitch. Yeah, that's gone now. So let's give this a try. Oh, actually, one more thing before we do this. The pro-con also needs to know its list ID. If I look up procon.ts here, it needs to have a list ID. And currently, when we create this, it has no knowledge of the list ID. So let me show you a cool way that we can handle that. Inside of the procon creator, I'm going to send down the props so that we can access that list ID. Control-Alt-Click so that it opens up on the right side. Let's accept the props in here with the name of those props. Now check this out. One of the settings we have is merge. And merge can be a getter. All right, remember, just about everything inside of these composables is a maybe ref or getter. And what we're going to do is say, hey, I want you to merge all of this into the form. So notice if I control space here, we get typing. All of everything inside of this object gets merged into the form before it's created. So this is a really cool place to put things like the list ID. The list ID is equal to props dot list ID. Another way that we could have done this is we could have said, hey, when you create it, I want you to say procon creator.form.value.list ID is equal to props dot there we go, dot list ID. So this is another way we could have done it. We also could have done it like this. We could have just sent it directly into the create method, which means it would have got merged in. List ID. In fact, that's actually a little bit cleaner, right? However, I kind of like doing it this way. One of the reasons I created this functionality is it just cleans things up a little bit and pushes the thinking, the worry about working with the list ID into the composable itself. So I kind of like that. It feels nicer to be able to push that concept into here. And then when you actually do the create, it just cleans up the template a little bit. And I'm very pro cleaning up the template. I'd rather keep this really simple and avoid stuff like this, at create, and then having to have a function that gets cracked open like that, just because I think it reads a little bit better. And if you really want to know how this gets created, you can then control-click create, control-click the composable, and then sort of view what's happening inside of there. Okay, so now it gets the list ID as well, and now we've got this beautiful sort of clean API usage for that component. And let's go ahead and try create one. So create a pro. Currently, my partner and I are looking at buying a house, and one of the things that she wants is it to be close to Noosa. So maybe the house is close to Noosa, so we say close to Noosa. Create. Now it worked, but it didn't hide the dialogue. And when the form got reset, can you see what happened there? So actually, see if you can follow me here. So that got created. The composable behind the scenes resets the form when something's been created. So basically, it has to create a blank slate and get rid of everything in the form. And by doing that, isPro became null. And therefore, our dialogue turned red because it now thinks it's a con. Because since isPro is null and null is falsy, it became red. So a few crazy things happened there. Really, all we need to do to fix this now is make sure that the dialogue closes. Again, I want you to focus on where I do this. I want the dialogue closing functionality to be inside the creator. We can simply say here, hey, on success, when you do a successful create, I want you to say show dialog.value is equal to false. Oop, I've done that wrong. Bit of a syntaxy thing there. Yeah, honestly, this could probably be a one-liner. And you're not allowed to return an assignment. So you'll notice that we get a red squiggly there. So when you're assigning a value, basically an arrow function automatically returns what's on the right side of it. That's why we get a red squiggly, because you're not allowed to return an assignment. So if I put that in an object like this, it works. But another way you can do it is you could either just do it like that, or you can put it in parentheses. Yeah, actually, honestly, I should probably just do it with the object syntax, because then it's obvious to other developers. Whereas the whole parentheses thing is just a little bit different enough that a lot of people might not know what it's actually doing. So yeah, we'll just write it like this. Let's try another one. Create con. I really want a property that's got a river. So maybe this one that we're looking at doesn't have a river. Create that. There we go. It doesn't have a river, and it closes the dialog. And they still show the right colors. Yeah. And there we go. So now we've got the creating of things working well. Let's go ahead and build the table. Get rid of the pre-tag now. And we're going to say, and see, one of the cool things about this naming convention, I know what this is going to be called. It's going to be manage pro cons table. And there we go. We've got the auto import happening. Save that. Control Alt click that. We want to remain in control. And so we're going to go very incremental here by saying define props, get the name of this component, do that. And we're going to accept here the pro cons. And that's going to be a collection of pro con. Remember, we're pulling collection out of Pina ORM because that's what view model uses behind the scenes. It uses Pina ORM, and Pina ORM returns us back a collection of pro con. And we decided in the last video that we were going to use collection rather than an array like this. So this would also work. The only benefit we get really is that we know that the thing passing through is correct. So if I were to send through something like, would any work? Yeah, any would work. But if I were to send through, let's just say an interface or something. Hang on, it's done like this, man. Yeah, that now gives us a red squiggly to be like, hey, make sure you're sending through something that extends a Pina ORM model. Okay, you don't have to understand that for now, but that's basically why we decided to use collection. I just wanted to insert a little reminder there about the mentality behind that. Okay, do a redo. Yeah, there we go. Do I have an alias for this? Does that still work? Let me just quickly check something. TS config. No, maybe I don't. Should probably do that at some point. Create a nice alias for our models. Ah, this is fine for now. Okay, so we want to make sure those pro cons can be shown. So we'll do that. Crack this open a little bit. Now we get that red squiggly, which is great. This is one of the things I love about TypeScript. Once you get on top of it and you've got all the tooling set up, TypeScript just kind of shows you where to focus next a lot of the time. So now I can say the pro cons for that is equal to list finder dot records dot value dot pro cons, because a list finder dot value, that's giving us just the list, but we want to go one step further and get the pro cons out of that list. Now the reason we're getting a red squiggly here is because this little optional chaining that we've got happening here means that that could be undefined. So pro cons here, notice that it could be null and it could be undefined. So we can easily fix this by simply saying, hey, if nothing comes out there, I want you to just give me an empty array. And that's going to satisfy TypeScript. And there we go. Our pro cons are now being passed through to this table component. Now it's safe to go ahead and actually make that a table. Rows is equal to pro cons. Save that. And there's our pro cons. So we can push on. Right. Design. So we get a dialog for creating a pro con. We want the title of the list at the top of the table. And then we got description and importance out of 10. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to breeze through all of this. I've already got the columns, so I did that earlier. I might actually just delete this so that we can build that again. New file inside of there. By the way, I'll quickly describe what I was doing there with my hotkeys. Control-Alt-M. And that's why I was able to then find this folder and say new file. We'll come in here and say columns.ts. And we'll say const export const columns, the type of that is a Q table column, and it's actually an array of those. We give it an array like this, and the first thing we have is description, and the second thing was the importance. And then we're also going to want an edit button, I think, as well. Yeah, I haven't done it in the design, but we'll want an edit button. So description, importance, and then edit. Okay. Label, description, name, description, and then the field is also going to be description. Yep, so that's satisfied now. Description, importance, is that what we actually called it? Yeah, importance, which is a number. Importance. And we also were going to have edit, that's right. And I think I talked about this in the previous video, but for things like buttons, you can say style is equal to width 0 pixels, and that doesn't literally make it 0 pixels, it just makes it as small as it can be. And this is really good for things like buttons, where you don't want it to, you want the cell to be as small as it can possibly be in relation to the button. And so that's just like a little hack that I do every now and then. It's not really a hack, it's a little pattern that I do. Okay, so let's save that and then use those columns. We can do that by saying here columns is equal to columns, control space, there we go, get that imported. By the way, I should mention this. When I do that, I'm looking to make sure that it's just the / columns, because notice that we got columns a lot of times here. I want the one that's /, the one that's closest to my current file. So often when I'm doing this, I'm not just looking on the left, I'm also looking on the right to make sure I'm pulling in the correct columns. And I know that this is a single context file, single context column, and therefore that's the correct one, the one that's next to where this component is. Okay, now our columns are showing up correctly. Let's just do some nice alignment here by going align left for the description. Whoop. Importance, and then, yeah, I think that's actually fine as it is. For the importance, maybe I should also give that a width of 0 pixels. Yeah, because that's just going to be a number. Yeah, that's what I'll do. Okay, so we can add them in. Next, we want to be able to edit them. So let's go ahead and do the edit dialog, and hopefully I can get through this without having to do too much explanation this time. So we get our create procon dialog. Let's have an update procon dialog. Control space. Update pro. Edit procon dialog. Maybe we didn't actually build this component. We go to our components here. We can see all of them at a glance. And yeah, we never created one for editing, which you probably do want it because maybe it's because we want to edit it inline. Actually, I might do that. Let's just do inline editing. I feel like that makes more sense anyway at this point. It gives us a chance to sort of do something different. So that means I'm going to come into my columns. Let's go back to that table. Control click, and I'll get rid of the edit button. Okay. And we'll make it so that you can click on this to edit it. So how would we do that? Let's say first we need to tap in. Body, cell, and the cell name in this case is description. I'm going to quickly mention this. Description has to match up with the name, not the field. That confused the crap out of me in the past. And there's a very good reason Quasar does this, because the field might even be a function. So it's possible that your field is a function that accepts the row, and it might even change something in the row and say like row dot description, and then, I don't know, add a dash or whatever. And for that reason, we need a way to get just a pure string that represents that field. So that's why it's really important to understand that name and field are actually different. Name is how you can identify it with something like a slot, and the field is how that field actually gets discovered, and yeah, this can also be a function as well. So that's really good to know. So description, I'm trying to type too fast. And I'll pull out the scope here and all the classic stuff we need to do. QTD, props is equal to scope. Check that that's working, and it is. And now I got to think about how I'm going to tackle this. This is a pattern I've only just been coming up with recently, how to make it so that you can edit things directly inside of the table, because it's not obvious how to do this in a way that's decoupled. And here's what I've come up with. So you bear with me if I kind of need to fix a few things here and there, but we can say on that input, if you update the model value, we're going to emit an event. Emit equals define emits. And we've got an event name equal to maybe like, probably just update even. Yeah, update. And that's going to pass through a form. Okay, because this is going to be, this is a form because it might only be part. In fact, it will be only part of the model. So we'll call this pro-con form. Well, honestly, at this point, you can probably just call it a form. Then through to that, pro-con. All right, there we go. We got there in the end. So when this wants to update, we're going to emit an update event. So that's the first thing. Next, the model value there is actually going to be scope.value. Now, what this means is, I just need a quick second to think of how I'm going to explain this as best as possible. Okay, so the strategy we're going to use here is optimistic updates. What we want to do is say, hey, as you type inside of here, I want you to go ahead and update that description inside of the store. Usually what happens when we do an update is it waits until it gets the response from the backend, and then when it gets the response, it performs the update. So the problem with that is as you're typing in, you then click out of it. So as you're typing, the model inside of the store hasn't updated yet. Whereas what we want to do is we want to make it so that as you type, the value in the store is updated straight away. You know what? I might actually give a little bit of a flow chart here because I want to make sure that this kind of sinks in. So usually what happens is something like this. I'm making this up as I go here. Not the concept. I know the concept, but I haven't mapped this out before. So the user types, let's say a character. Update request is made. And then when the update request is made, value updated in the store. Okay, so the user types a character, the update request is made, and then I should add another one here, which is on success, then that value, that updated value, and I should actually write in here description, is updated in the store. Okay? User types into the input. That sends a request to the backend. When it is successful, that value updates in the store. Here's the problem. The user might be typing, let's just say they type 4 characters. A request is made. And let's just say between these 2 points here, that the user continues to type. So let's just say that they wrote, for example, AAA. Let's make that a bit bigger. And then they start typing, and then the request is made, all right? So now it's making a request with AAA, but then the user types BBB. The problem is, when that is successful, this value then changes, and the value in the store is now equal to AAA. So they've kind of like fallen out of sync with each other. Now, this makes sense with a classic form, because usually with a classic form, you type into it, the user presses update, and then the update occurs. Whereas this is a bit different. We want to update as we go. We want to update as the user types into the form. So what we do is we do something called an optimistic update, where we say, when the user types a character, we skip a bunch of these steps and we go directly to value, which in this case is the description, right? The description here. The moment the user types, we straight away update that value in the store. Okay? So that means the moment they press A, it's updated in the store. They start typing B, and every single character gets updated in the store straight away, whilst a request is also being made. And then usually you would also have a debouncer on this request as well. So that's how we're going to handle this. Honestly, I haven't sort of perfected this technique with view model. I'm trying to figure out the optimal sort of way to do this, but that's kind of like an overview of the concept of optimistic updates that we're trying to achieve in this scenario. Okay, so we come back here and let's actually implement that now. We've got our manage procons table. Let's go to our manage procons view. And we're going to need a composable for updating. So I Control-Alt-M in here, new file, use procon updater.ts. Composable. Const update is equal to use updater. Control space, get that imported. Procon, get that imported. Now we come in here and we use the spread operator. Next, we're going to add an option in here called, where is it? Optimistic. And we're going to set that equal to true. So basically what we're saying here is exactly what I showed you inside of this Miro example. By saying optimistic true, rather than going like this, we go like this. The moment that it changes, it updates straight away in the store before the request is successful. Okay. And actually, the way I should have written this is it's actually more like this. It does that and then goes to there. So the request is actually made at the same time that it's updated in the store. Okay. So now that we've got optimistic true there, we can say const procon updater is equal to use procon updater. There we go. And next up, we want to listen for the event on that table, which is at... Is it showing up in the list here? No, sometimes the typing doesn't seem to work for this. That's okay. So at update, or maybe it was working. Hang on, I'm just curious. At, oh yeah, it's right there. Or did it just show up then? I can't tell. You can, because you can rewind the video. Okay, so when an update occurs, I want to say procon updater dot update. I wonder if we can just do this directly. Take in the form and send it directly in there. So in order to do that, the form is going to need the ID. Yeah, let's see if we can do this in a one-liner. It's kind of curious. So we go emit. Oh, one more thing we want to add here, is rather than an update event, I'm just going to wait for a blur on this. So there's no point sending the update until the user has actually blurred that field. So what I do is focus out, And the reason we can't use @blur here is because I found that @blur is a little bit too early, where the event that you get with the blur event doesn't have the updated value yet. So I might actually show you that. I want to make sure that you have a good idea of what this actually looks like. Event, and I think it's console.log event.target.value, maybe? I don't know. Let's try that. Yeah, so if I type into that TT, just a few random characters, notice that we don't get those random characters showing up. So I said too early before, but what I meant was it's too late. By the time you do a blur, the target has already lost those values. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that when we unblur, we take those remaining values, update what the value is in the store so that they actually remain in the input. And we can do that by saying on focus out. Let's try it again, see if this works this time. Yeah, so you notice that we have those extra values now. It took me forever to figure this out. That in order to actually hijack that state, to get that state, we need to use focus out rather than blur. Bloody nightmare trying to figure that one out. Okay, so now whenever we focus out, we emit an event, which is the update event. And inside of that, we say the description is equal to event.target.value. Now, that's actually not enough. It also needs to know the ID of the thing it's going to update. And luckily, we have that here. We can say ID is equal to scope.row.id, because the row is the object itself. So in this case, the row is the procon. Save that. Add some dots in there. Now we need to actually do something with it. So next up, we want to say when you update it, procon updater, perform the update. That looks like that should be everything. Okay, it did something. Let's try that again. Wonder why. I wonder what's going on there. Scope.row.id. We take the form of the thing we want to update. So why would that be deleting everything? All right, this is a good chance to show how we might look at debugging something like this. If we go to application, IndexedDB, we can actually see what's being stored in our database. Keyval store, keyval. Here's our procons records. They've still got their list ID in there. Ending with F53. Interesting. 8075. Oh no, it's just not opened up enough, so I can't see. Yeah, E7F6. Okay, so the list ID is correct. If I refresh this, do they show up? Wow, that's really strange. I wonder why that would be disappearing then. Is the ID of that thing changing? Let's do a refresh here. AF08, CD53. Let's just change one of those. Do a refresh to see what it's changed as. No, the ID is still the same. Okay, that's kind of weird. But we're losing... we're losing those records at some point. I might pause this and try and figure out what's going wrong. Okay, I think I know the problem. This is actually a bug with this version of view model. So what happens is we're sending through a form with the description and the ID. And what's happening is behind the scenes, rather than it doing an update, it's essentially replacing the entire model with what's inside of the form. So when I go to view, pro cons, we can see this one that was updated doesn't have an importance, is pro, list ID, etc. However, when I refresh it, it is that way in the form, but it's kind of not updating it properly in the store. So I've got a pretty simple solution for that for now, but in the future that this should actually end up being fixed, which should be, considering I built the library, so you can go ahead and yell at me if it still isn't fixed in the future. Okay, so basically we want to make sure the entire form is sent, and we can easily do that by saying procon updater dot make form, and then we send through the ID, form.id, and coerce that to a string. That's just to make TypeScript happy, because ID could technically be undefined. And so we say, otherwise just an empty string, even though we know it's not going to be an empty string. So it's one of those kind of little annoying things about TypeScript, pros and cons. Actually, that was kind of funny because we're building a pros and cons app. Good one, Luke. And there we go. So that updates now. Okay, and if we refresh it, those updates are actually being made on the back end as well. Cool. So we're getting pretty close to being done here. That gives you like a little bit of an idea of how you might do some live updates. And by the way, this live update feature, if it gets an error, which is kind of hard to test at the moment because we're using an environment that's not very prone to errors, but if that update were unsuccessful, then it would roll back those changes. And this would actually change back to its original value. So if I said doesn't, ... clicked out of it, then after it makes the request and the request fails, those dots would actually then disappear. So that's how it deals with errors. It basically reverses it. So it's not something like, if you were doing something like Trello, you would do something slightly more sophisticated than this, where you probably have a queue of changes, or I don't know what syncing, they've probably got some crazy syncing algorithm to try and get as much speed out of it as they can. But like, honestly, for something that you're just starting out with, building it like this is totally fine. And then, you know, wait till you're getting money in your pocket for your apps. And then when you're getting money in your pockets, then you can start putting resources into creating a more sophisticated syncing process. But yeah, I think something like this is actually totally fine. Next, let's do a little bit of styling stuff. So if I jump into the table, for the input, we can make this borderless. So that just makes it an input that you can come in here and edit, but it doesn't have the borders in there. Oh, it's doing that weird thing where they swap positions, and I think it's because I need the table to be ordered. Let's see if I can remember how to do this. I believe it's like pagination, sort by, description. Or really what you'd want to do is sort it by like a created at field. Or importance. Yeah, that's not switching places anymore, which is good. Yeah, usually what I do is I'd say sort by and then created underscore at, but we don't have a created at field on this. Usually when you're working with a backend though, you would have that field. And then that would correct that problem where they're kind of switching positions when you change a value. But for now, we're just going to order it by the description. Yeah, so that's fine. And I might even add in here the whole records per page thing. Yeah, rows per page. I think if you set it to 0, yeah, it just makes it all by default. And then in this case, I'd probably just hide the bottom as well. Hide bottom. Set that equal to true. And then you don't end up with that little bottom thing that gives you the pagination, because I don't think I would want it for an app like this. Cool. So that's kind of it. Oh, we want to know if it's a pro or a con. That would look good. So let's come up here to columns and do one for the is pro. So like is pro. Actually, I'm not even going to have a label for this. Is pro, center, and this is where we would then use that style is equal to width 0 pixels idea. So that should work now. So now we've got is pro and it comes up as true or false. But now let's just color it a little bit. So I'm going to steal that. Do this all the time. Just steal code from yourself. Body cell is pro. Remember, is pro here lines up with the name, not the field. So if I change that to is dash pro, for example, and let's just do something like that. That doesn't work anymore, but dash will work, right? But usually these are going to be the same. Just be aware of that. So is underscore pro, and now we can tap into this, and I might just use like a Q avatar of whoop. And we'll set the color scope dot value is going to be true or false, and if it's true we'll make it green, and if it's false we'll make it red. Yeah, and let's do a -7 on those. Cool. Yeah, it's a little bit overkill. Maybe make it a bit smaller. Size is equal to small. Yeah. And oh, look, it doesn't have to be perfect. This is more about architecture anyway. And then we want to do the importance as well. One thing I might do is actually make this dense, though. That's what I was thinking. Dense. Yeah, just to kind of save a little bit of space there. Okay, I think that's good. We're going to do the exact same concept here with the importance. Importance. And we're going to set the type of this field to a number. I think you can actually say max length as well. Does that work for a number, though? I think it would have to be max for a number. Let's see if this works. I didn't even know. And then we'd say the min is equal to 1. So if I said 5, that works. If I said 12, that should not work. So I can type it in directly like this. Yeah, so what you could do, I guess. Would I do that in line? Yeah, honestly, I probably would in this case because this component's not that complicated. So you could just do something like this. If event.target.value, and you might do like a number here to get a number out of that. If that is greater than 10, then we would, yeah, maybe we do this. We say like, let importance is equal to that, and then we pass it through here. Then we could say if it's greater than 10, then we just set that back to 10. I could probably do this as a one-liner. Yeah, so let's do it as a one-liner. And then we'll have the invert of that. So if it is less than 1, then I want you to set that to 1. Let's try that, see if that works. 1, 5, click out of it, and it sets it to 10. -1, and it sets it to 1. 0. Yeah, cool. Maybe we can make it so that when we click on this, it focuses the text. So you can just click and then type. Yeah, screw it. Let's give it a go. No, I'm going to save that for another day. I want to make sure these are just about architecture for now. Maybe you can try that if you'd like. See if you can make it so clicking on this automatically selects the whole thing. I'll give you a hint. You'd probably have to set that to a ref, like input component, and then you'd have to come up here and say const input, and you'd actually say components, and you wouldn't call that, you'd call it importance. Input components, and the reason you use the plural there is because this ref is inside of a loop, right? Because we're inside of a body cell, we're inside of a row, therefore it's in a loop. And what it does is it gives you an array of every single component for that ref. Let me actually show you that. We can go on a bit of a tangent here. I'm going to do a set timeout because this would... What happens is when you latch onto refs like this, so if you have a ref with that variable name, Vue, this is actually a lot of things, it's something people don't know about Vue. Vue will actually automatically, once it's loaded the component, set this variable equal to that component there. In this case, the Q input. So now, that's why I've got this timeout of 500, or you could even say like on mounted would probably work there. In fact, let's just do that because it's a little bit more correct. Now I should be able to console.log that. Yeah. I haven't done this in a while, so hopefully I'm right about this. Refresh. Okay, it hasn't finished loading them yet in that case. So this is mounted, but it's still fetching them from the back end because we've got that mock timeout. So I'm going to go back to, let's just cut this. Set timeout. This is good stuff to know. Let's go a second just to make sure it's going to work. See, I would have thought that would give me an array. I'm pretty sure that's supposed to give me an array. Because then how do we target this individual input? You know what? I've gone down the wrong line of thinking anyway. Because what you would do is you listen to an app focus event. Well, Lugu done screwed up. What you'd actually do is you'd say, hey, when you focus on this event, and let's just log that event so that we can explore it a little bit. Okay, this is fun. There we go. So when that focuses, we can now say target, which gives us the input itself. And I think I can right click on that and say store as global variable. Now if I scroll to the bottom here, we've actually got that in temp1, right? So now we can sort of play around here and say temp1.focus just to see if that would work. No, what did I want to say? I wanted to say like select all. Select? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay, so then we would say here on focus event dot target, in other words, the thing that I focused on, which is the input, and I just want you to call select on that. TypeScript hates it, but let's see if it works. Yeah, it works. And I can click on here and say 5 there, and just it sort of easily jump around the place here. 10 and 3. Refresh it. Is that still right? Yeah. There we go. So now we can easily set the importance. And I think that's about it. Let's make it so you can order it by the importance as well. So if we come to importance here, we can say sortable is equal to true. And how about we set an importance by default as well? That actually would make a lot of sense. So we'll say on the creator, merge in, and import. See how, when you get to know this, see how easy it is to kind of jump around files and add things in where they need to go. And this is the thing about learning something like the Blue Standard. If you have standards for things, then it takes a little bit more time to have the knowledge of how things are done. But once you know about merge and you know about the different ways that you can sort of hook in to create, you know that you could say creator.form.value and change a value that way. Or you can jump into merge and do it that way. And you know kind of how the flow of all of these things work. By layering the knowledge, you become much, much faster in the future. It's going to slow you down in the short term, but later on, you'll be developing and you'll just know where everything goes. I've got to tell you, that is the best feeling. It feels like you're flying, like you're gliding through the air and your fingers are just kind of flowing and everything just kind of falls where it needs to go because you know the best place to put things. And you're not constantly worrying about crap like, where does this go? And oh my goodness, this is getting overwhelming because there's too much code on my screen now. It's a worthwhile battle to be fighting to get to this point where you can then just create this nice flow when you're developing apps. Okay, anyway, let's set the importance equal to maybe 5 by default. That would make sense. So let's create a pro and has lots of trees. Create. There we go, and it sets it to 5. And we also want to be able to delete these, of course. So let's come back to our table. There it is there. Columns. By the way, this is something I'll often do. If I've only been working with like 5 or 6 files, sometimes you just go Control P and you just go up and down, you find the file you want, or you just click on the file you want. You don't have to be searching all the time. Usually I start my development by searching for the files that I want, and that takes a little bit of brain power to think about how it's named and remember the naming conventions. But then about 10 or 20 minutes into my coding session, I'm almost never searching anymore. It's almost always Control P, find what you need. Control P, and usually it's actually 2 or 3 files you're working with, so you can very quickly find it in your most recent files. And there really is no reason to have your directory listings opened all the time. For me, that's more about creating files, where you'll be on a file like columns, and I want to create something next to this file, so I'll go Control-Alt-M, and I'll know where to do it straight away. So that's kind of a cool little tip. Control-KB to hide that. What am I doing again? Oh, okay, that's right, the delete button. So we'll come in here, and we'll say label is equal to delete. And behind, even though the label is delete, I'm going to call this destroy behind the scenes, because that's the nomenclature that we use for deleting stuff. I talked about this before because the delete keyword is problematic. We use the word destroy instead. I used to use the word remove, but I changed it to destroy to align more with Pina ORM and with Laravel. Okay, so that should show up now. There it is. We get our delete column, width of 0 pixels, which makes sense. And we'll also align this to the center. Now let's jump into our component, and I'll copy one of those. Come down here, body, cell, destroy. And this is going to be a Q-button. And we'll set the size. Yeah, I think small is good for that. Icon is equal to MDI delete. Oh, come on, auto import. Come on. Restart Vola. And I'll set the color of this equal to red. 4 in the meantime. I like to make delete buttons just a little bit faded out. So I think 5 or 6 is the default. So we make that like red 5, then it will sort of fade it out a little bit. Body cell destroy. Why is that a red squiggly? Variable scope is already... What? Oh, I've accidentally put that inside of another template. My bad. Okay, let's try refreshing this now. So MDI delete, control space, get that imported. Where is my delete button? Body cell destroy, columns. That's what we called it, destroy. Oh, I spelled that wrong. What did I do? Destroy. Oh, it's actually spelled wrong here. I bet you saw that. Destroy. There we go. Refresh the page. There we go. Now we'll make this flat and round. Yeah, I'm going to fade that out a little bit more by making it a 4 there. Okay, I think that looks good. Cool. That doesn't look centered, but it's only because of this. It's sortable. So we want to make sure that destroy isn't sortable. That doesn't make sense. And that should center the delete word with the button now. Yeah. Cool. When you click on this, we're going to emit an event called destroy. We need to know what we're going to destroy. So we'll say scope.row to get that sent through. I'm going to copy paste update because these will be very similar. Destroy, but instead of a form, we want the actual procon itself. Procon. By the way, update. Should this be a... Oh, yeah. Totally ignore that line of thought. So now we go back to the view. Where's my view? Control P. And I'm searching for the word view here because I know that the most recent view is going to be the one I'm looking for. That's almost always the case when you start working on something. It's rare that you're sort of switching between views. And we'll go to the table and we'll say, yo, when it's time to destroy something, we now need a composable for this. Control-Alt-M, new file, use pro con destroyer. Destroyer, it sounds so cool. Const destroyer is equal to use destroyer. There we go. Send through the pro con there. Get that imported. And now when I try to destroy here, we'll say pro con destroyer, control space, get that imported, destroyer dot destroy. And let me see if I can get the spinner working for this, because spinners, when you're destroying things and updating things, is kind of, can be very confusing when you're working inside of a table. And this is how I've solved it. If we send through, actually, let's see if it works first. Okay, it doesn't even work yet. Oh, we need the row that we're actually destroying. So let's say procon and say, I want you to destroy that procon dot ID. Duh. Coerce that to a string. There we go, that works. But we lose the spinner. Let's set a long spinner time. If I go into view model in my boot file, I'm going to put my mock latency on something a bit higher. Well, let's say 1.5 seconds. Ooh, now that takes ages to load, so that's good. Just because when this is being destroyed, I want to make sure I can catch that spinner and make sure. So one of the hard things to do is make sure that only the button that you clicked on is spinning. Now, this is easy when you couple your table to the thing being destroyed. But when you create, when you use this architecture, you need to have a little bit more knowledge. It's not difficult, it just requires more knowledge. So what we do here now is we pass destroying -id, so the ID of the thing that is being destroyed. And it turns out that procon destroyer.destroying.value, this is actually an ID. So it's not just a Boolean of true or false. I believe it's either false to say nothing is destroying, or it's the ID of the thing being destroyed. Okay, so that's really good to know. Rather than saying, hey, something's being destroyed with a Boolean, we say either nothing's being destroyed or this is the ID of the thing being destroyed. So destroying actually gives you a little bit of extra information. It's not just a Boolean, it also gives you that extra information of what's being destroyed. So that means in manage procons table, I can now come down here and inside of the props say destroying ID. We'll do it like that. And I'm just going to steal the typing here. What is it? False or loose primary key. We'll have to get that imported. Oh no. Have we actually got that available in view model? I might not have exposed it at view model /core. Oh, bugger. I'm going to have to expose that. Let's just quickly restart Voila and check just in case I can get it from somewhere. Yeah, okay. I need to update my package so that this is actually being exported. Otherwise, we can't use it. Bugger. Well, there's actually another way we can do this. And this would be kind of a cool learning experience. We can say use destroyer return and get that imported. So this is the composable of use destroyer. This is the typing for that. And now I can pass through there, pro con. And so now I think I have to do a type of there. Okay, so that's working. And now I can actually crack this open and say, I specifically want destroying. So now I get the typing of destroying there. It's a little bit much to type, but that's something that we can do. We can, actually, can I get rid of this? Nah, it's required. Okay, I need to do a little bit of extra work for TypeScript on this package. But there we go. Now we've got the destroying ID being passed through correctly there. And where's the part where it gets sent through? Manage procons table. Go back to the view. Wonder why it's not happy with that now. Oh, because that gives us a ref. So destroying in this case is the ref of that. So I think I need to do like an unref. Unwrap ref. Yeah, man, this is a bit much. So this is the type of a ref that's equal to whatever destroying is. So what you can do is Vue gives you this unwrap ref TypeScript helper, which gives you whatever's inside of that ref. And there we go. Now that's working. Like I said before, this is a bit verbose, but at least it gets us there and gives me the chance to demonstrate this with proper typing. So now what we can do is we can add loading, and I bloody hope this works, is equal to scope.row.id. So give me the ID of the pro-con, and if that's equal to destroying IDs, the ID of the thing that's being destroyed, then we need a loading spinner to show up on this button. And by the way, when Quasar has loading, I'm pretty sure it makes it so that button can't be clicked anymore. So instead of having to do like disabled and stuff like that, we can just set loading equal to true, and that button won't be clickable. Really cool. So let's try this. And there we go. Now we've got a fully functional table. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this journey and you learned a couple of cool things along the way. Let's just do a little bit of playing around to see if this all works now. I might even just delete that. Yeah, we don't have the loading spinner on that one, so you can add that if you'd like. So we can add here pro cons, buying, and the house we were trying to buy at the time was Pomona Street. So we can say Pomona was the name of the area. House. But it looks like we're not going to get that one. Give it a color. Go ahead and create that. Let me get rid of this mock latency now. View model, and I'm going to get rid of it entirely. Okay. So now we can click on here to jump in there, and it's not very pretty, but that's fine. We'll create a pro here that says close to Noosa. Create. It's also close to shops. Oh, when I press enter, it just closed that. Let's try that again. Yeah, interesting. So you'd want to make it so that pressing enter just goes ahead and creates that. Let's quickly have a look at how we might tackle that. How about pro-con form? Yeah, and then we would say, okay, so let's go to the pro-con dialog, create pro-con dialog. And at submit is equal to, we can probably omit create. Yeah, okay, so we'll say const emit is equal to define emits. And we'll come in here and we'll call this event create. Now remember, we are now hijacking the create event. So the create event on a create dialog will no longer be triggered because we're essentially saying I'm now in charge of the create event. So that means what we have to do is we have to come in here and say at create is equal to emit create. Okay? And we also want to be able to say when you submit the form to emit create. Let's see if that works. It seemed to be doing a page refresh though. Maybe I have to do like a prevent default. Enter. Oh no, that's working. Create pro. So we'll say here close to shops. Oh man, this is nice. And we'll create a con, which is lots of work, because that house was a lot of work. Another big pro was amongst, it was hilly. So we actually wanted a place that's kind of hilly, not entirely flat, because it creates like really nice views. Well, that's another one. Nice views. Most people don't want something hilly, but we do. Another thing was, it was mostly pros for this house. I really liked it. So the con was stretching our finance. Place for yurts. Lots of places for yurts. Lots of private places. Okay, you don't need to see me writing out this entire list, but you get the idea. And now I can maybe say like, hey, let's order this by importance. Close to new, so that's pretty important to us. We'll set that to an 8. We'll order it to there at the top. Lots of work. That's, you know, not such a big deal. That is pretty important. Actually, maybe I should put that higher than I would think. Stretching our finance, that's really important. So we're going to push that right up the top. And now I can just come down here and add the importance to these. That's not super important. Private places for yurts. That's kind of important for me. Yeah, now we can come in here and like make all of these changes. By the way, one of the reasons I want a property with some of these features is I want to be able to invite coders from around the world to come and code with me. And so this isn't set in stone yet, but it's kind of like a dream that I have, to have a property where coders like yourselves could sort of come and visit and we could all code together. So anyway, this is good enough. I hope that you got a good idea of the architecture from this video, and I'll see you guys. I think honestly, this is everything you need to know now for us to do our build an app day. So for those of you that are watching in the community, I'm actually building these videos for some people that I'm talking to on Discord, devs that I've gotten to know a little bit, who I think would be really cool to code with. And the idea is I wanted to build some videos that teach them my architecture, and then we're all going to code an app live together. So there's going to be 1, 2, 3 of us, and all 3 of us are going to code an app. Well, actually 4 of us, if I include myself. All 4 of us are going to code an app, build an app using this architecture. And it's kind of a way to pressure test some of this stuff, to say, okay, how quickly can I actually teach people on this architecture? What are the things that that are not obvious, the problems that we run into? What are the things that I thought were simple but actually turn out to be complicated? And then when we're finished, and it's also just, it's just going to be a lot of fun. I was thinking maybe not the first one, but future ones I could do with other devs. So if you're watching this video and you want to be a part of this, then feel free to hit me up on Discord. Yeah, other devs could then, you know, join in and we could do live streams where we build live apps. Oh, and the other thing I'm testing is, does this architecture actually allow people to collaborate together without clashing? So the idea is each person could take their own menu item. We're going to build a books app. So one might be books. An item might be authors. An item might be checkout, for checking out books, where it's got like a QR code reader. And we would essentially try and come up with 4 menus, simple apps that are like 4 different things. And then we all go off and we work on our separate things for like half an hour. And then after like 20 minutes or half an hour, we basically pause and I say, anybody having any problems? And if they are, then, you know, live, we can go through those problems together. And if they're not having any problems, then we can go back to work and, yeah, see how quickly we can work together to build an app. Because one of the ultimate dreams here is that, and I think I described this in the other video, but if we can get really good at that, then we can go out to clients, potential clients, and ask them what they're looking for in an app, and kind of like design an app with a potential client. Then we can head home, and like I talked about before, we can use schema.blue to then build out the structure of the application. And then when we get home, we automatically then generate everything because schema.blue has all the information we need to generate a bunch of our files. We can even come up with component names. Maybe somebody can sit there with an iPad and like somebody who's really good at working on Miro with an iPad. They can go through all of that. And then, I'm just imagining us all in a car. Maybe that's not realistic. Or, some people would be in a car, some people would be online. But then, we're planning things. And then when we get home, we generate everything for the app because this, would sync up with schema.blue. And then everybody takes their own sort of piece of the pie for that app and they start working on it. And then within, like, we get really, really good at this. I can imagine a world where within 45 minutes of coding, we have something that we can actually show to a client. And it would depend on the complexity of the app. Maybe it actually takes a day. Maybe it takes 1 or 2 hours. Maybe it's super complicated and it would usually take people, months to build, but we can build it over a weekend. I don't know. Like it's kind of still up in the air of what we can do and how quickly we can do it. But I know that for myself, with the structure that I've showed you today, something like what I've shown you here, I can get that built within about 20 minutes and it's going to get a lot faster. To be realistic, it's probably more like 30, 35 minutes to get everything that you've seen today built. I don't know, actually, I should time myself on that. But eventually, and I'm very close to this is what I'm currently working on, this create form will automatically generate based on the stuff we put into schema.blue. This table will automatically generate. So I think it's quite realistic. In fact, I know it's realistic that we can get the entirety of this project down to under 10 minutes. So everything I just showed you in 10 minutes. The schema.blue part, maybe that takes a bit longer, to think through and to format and to decide on what the database is going to look like. But then the common things like tables and, update forms and all that jazz, because that's all this is. Like, then you would just tap into here so you can make that button on the left. You would have this table automatically use the input components. So that would happen really quickly. Like most of this stuff would just happen so fast. And within 10 minutes, you'd have something. And then you can start focusing on, it's not just for speed. The other thing is then you can start focusing on the complicated stuff. So if this entire table is generated for us, we can start focusing on the edge case stuff. Like, oh, we want to put this little icon at the start. That's something that the generator wouldn't do. Or maybe it actually would. You could have like a render for a color field. Yeah, actually the generator could even cover something like that. But yeah, honestly, there's nothing here that couldn't be automatically generated in this app. Yeah, all right. Well, but you get the idea. Like sometimes there are things in tables that you just can't, it just creates an extra layer of customization that you need. Or there's things in pages. Not everything inside of an app is just tables and forms. Honestly, that actually ends up being most of apps. It's amazing how I come into companies and I think, oh, I'm going to do all this, like, I want to do all this fancy stuff. And sometimes I'll try and do, use cards instead of tables instead, blah, blah, blah. And they don't like it. They just want tables. People want tables. They're great. They're easy to use. Yeah, and so then, but that's cool because we can get past the all of the easy stuff like building tables. Because rather than like, do you really want to spend days just building out tables for your app? Often you hear people say, "Oh, don't end up building a CMS again," where somebody will build out an entire CMS, and it takes them ages and ages to build. I've done this before, where I essentially build out a CMS that could have been done with something like Strappy. But I had to build it myself because there's all these like little details that were very specific to the company I'm working at. And so you actually there are situations where you kind of do need to build your own CMS depending on the complexity of the project. But you don't want to be sitting there building tables over and over and over again all day long. You want all of that stuff to be done up front. And I always hear people talking about this, like, why are we building tables again? But nobody truly solves this problem because they never put the effort into making the components tappable. We can't. So when I solve this problem by making it so that all of these components are already decided up front with something like schema.blue, we have to. That's not enough. you have to do that, and you have to make it so that you can tap in, add your own columns, change what happens when you press this update button here, make it so that you can get rid of the create button and totally override it with something. Like, everything has to be tappable. If it's not tappable, then you hit brick walls. If you hit brick walls in the future, then you end up with crazy code, and nobody's actually using the component library anymore because they're like, oh, I was going to use the component in the library, but I needed to do X, Y, Z, and I couldn't. Which is why Quasar is so good, because everything is tappable. So you can commit to the library. You can't commit to a library that isn't flexible. So I've found that I can commit to Quasar because it allows me to do all of the details that I need to with its components. But this is the same with my libraries too. I have to make sure if I'm going to create this update dialog, it's tappable. I need to make sure if I'm creating a create dialog that it's tappable. I need to make sure if I'm making a table, this is a hard one. Forms is a really difficult one, where I want a form that generates by itself, that automatically has many-to-many relationships showing up with select menus. But you need to make sure that you've got pagination, so that as you scroll down the list, you can then load more items. You need to make sure you've got search. But this can't happen on the front end. This has to all happen on the back end, because if you've got 50,000 records in your select menu, then you can't rely on having all of those records already preloaded. And so you need to make sure that you've got heavy reliance on the back end, which is really difficult to do if you need to support multiple backends, which is why I created View Model. So like, I'm really trying super hard here to make sure that I'm solving these problems, but I'm doing it slowly and carefully, so that when I do eventually build a team of people, which is, going to be called the Quasar Army, or it might be or whatever we end up calling ourselves. I think I like the name Quasar Army. I need to make sure that we never end up in corners where people are like, oh, I can't do that. And then we essentially have to do let's ditch everything. We now need to use raw components, right? It's really important to me that doesn't happen, which is why I'm putting so much time and thought and energy into these patterns, and making sure that these patterns are flexible, but they're still patterns that we can follow, so that we get the best of both worlds, where we're all on the same page and we've got flexibility. And there's no way around it. If you're going to be on the same page and have flexibility, the only way you can do that is with education. And so this is the dream. We have really good education, so that everybody on the team can be on the same page. But that comes with, and that kind of like helps solve the flexibility problem. All right. Anyway, my girlfriend just got home, so I'm going to go spend time with her. Hope you enjoyed this video, my little rant at the end there. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.